Commerce Alive Today presents
Northwest Airlines. Northwest Airlines was founded on September 1, 1926, by Colonel Louis Britton, under the name Northwest Airways, a reference to the historical name for the Midwestern United States that derived from the Northwest Territory. Like other early airlines, Northwest's focus was not in hauling passengers, but in flying mail for the U.S. Post Office Department. The airline was originally based in Detroit, Michigan. The fledgling airline established a mail route between Minneapolis and Chicago, using open cockpit biplanes such as the Curtiss Oriole and the Waco Jim. From 1928 the enclosed cabin 6-passenger Hamilton H-45 and H-47 were used. Northwest Airlines began carrying passengers in 1927. In 1928 Northwest started its first international route with service to Winnipeg. In 1929, a group headed by Richard Lilly, a businessman from St. Paul, Minnesota, purchased the airline. In 1931, Northwest sponsored Charles and N. Lindbergh on a pioneering test flight to Japan via Alaska, scouting what would become known as the Northwest Airlines Great Circle route that could save 2,000 miles on a New York to Tokyo flight. In 1933 Northwest was selected to fly the Northern Transcontinental route to Seattle, Washington. It adopted the name Northwest Airlines the following year after the airmail scandal. Northwest Airways Incorporated changed its name to Northwest Airlines Incorporated and the airline was incorporated under its new name in the state of Minnesota. On January 10, 1938, Flight 2, a Lockheed Model 14 crashed in the Bridger Mountains, 12 miles northeast of Bozeman, Montana. This was the airline's first fatal crash, killing 10 passengers. 3 other Lockheed Model 14 aircraft belonging to Northwest crashed over the next 13 months. In 1939 Northwest had 5 daily flights from Chicago to Minneapolis, 3 continued west to Seattle through North Dakota and Montana. Northwest also served Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Portland, Oregon, by spurs from its transcontinental route. By the spring of 1948, Northwest was operating 3 different aircraft types, the 44-passenger seat Douglas DC-4, the 21-passenger seat Douglas DC-3 and the 36-passenger seat Martin 202. On October 30, 1941, Flight 5, a Douglas DC-3 crashed in fog and mist due to icing on the wings. 14 of the 15 passengers were killed in the crash. The pilot, Clarence Bates, was thrown clear of the wreckage and was the lone survivor. Northwest began to bolster the infrastructure on the domestic leg of this route during World War II when it flew soldiers and supplies from the northwestern U.S. to Alaska. It was at this point that Northwest began painting its airliners' tails bright red as a visual aid in the often harsh weather conditions. The airline's experience with the subarctic climate led the U.S. government to designate Northwest as the main airline over the North Pacific following the war. In the spring of 1947, Northwest began stationing employees at Haneda Airport in Tokyo, flying them from the United States via Alaska on its Great Circle route. On July 15, 1947, Northwest was the first airline to begin direct service between the United States and Japan, using a Douglas DC-4 airliner named the Manila. All pre-war airline service to East Asia had been via Hawaii and the Philippines. The flight to Japan originated at Wold Chamberlain Field in Minneapolis and stopped at Blatchford Field in Edmonton, Elmendorf AFB in Anchorage, and Shemya off in the western Aleutian Islands. The flight continued from Tokyo to Lunghua Airport in Shanghai and then to Nichols Field at Manila. A flight between Tokyo and Seoul began on October 20, 1947, and Naha Airport in Okinawa began to be a stop on the Tokyo to Manila route on November 16, 1947. With trans-Pacific flights established, Northwest began branding as Northwest Orient Airlines between 1947 and 1986, although its registered corporate name remained Northwest Airlines. On March 12, 1948, Flight 4422, a Douglas DC-4, was a military charter en route back to the U.S. from Shanghai, China, and had just refueled at Merrill Field, in Anchorage, Alaska, before continuing on toward LaGuardia Airport where the flight was to be concluded. The aircraft veered 23 miles off course and struck a mountain during a snowstorm. The snowstorms quickly buried the aircraft in a mountain glacier, killing all 30 passengers. On August 29, 1948, Flight 421 of Martin 202 was flying a scheduled domestic route from Chicago Minneapolis-St. Paul when it crashed about 4.1 miles NW of Winona, Minnesota, after entering the leading edge of a thunderstorm. Pieces of the plane were seen falling, and the plane was found on a bluff on the east side of the Mississippi River. The cause of the crash was the fatigue of the left wing, causing it to separate from the plane and precipitating the plunge, killing all 30 passengers. On October 27, 1948, Flight 6427 in Douglas DC-4 was on a special cargo trip flying Minneapolis-St. Paul Edmonton-Anchorage Tokyo when it crashed into a wooded area 34.4 miles east of Edmonton soon after takeoff. The investigation revealed that the captain had feathered the propellers in simulation to instruct the co-pilot on emergency procedures. This was determined to be the primary cause of the crash. 2 killed and 3 injured. Northwest service to Shanghai was suspended in May 1949 because of the civil war in China, with the Republic of China on the verge of collapse, and its government evacuated to the island of Formosa, Taiwan. Northwest Airlines added Songshan Airport in Taipei, the new capital city of the Republic of China, as a stop on the Tokyo-Okinawa-Manila route on June 3, 1950, with ongoing interchange service to Hong Kong operated by Hong Kong Airways. NWA continuously upgraded equipment on the Trans-Pacific routes. On June 22, 1949, Northwest received its first double-decker Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, enabling more comfortable accommodations and faster Trans-Pacific flights. The Stratocruiser began flying from the West Coast to Honolulu in 1950 and to Tokyo via Alaska on September 27, 1952. On March 7, 1950, Flight 307 Martin 202 was operating a domestically scheduled passenger flight routing Washington, D.C. Detroit Madison Rochester Minneapolis St. Paul Winnipeg crashed just before landing at Minneapolis, after deciding not to land at Rochester due to weather. The plane struck a flagpole at the National Soldiers Cemetery. The plane continued flying for another 3.8 miles when the left wing separated and fell. The plane crashed into a house, and both were engulfed in flames. The cause of the crash was determined to be the loss of visual reference to the ground due to the snow falling at the time, killing 12 passengers on the plane and 2 on the ground. On June 23, 1950, Douglas DC-4 Northwest 2501 was lost over Lake Michigan during a flight from New York's LaGuardia Airport to Seattle, Washington. The aircraft went off radar and a widespread search was conducted. Some debris, upholstery, and human remains were found floating on the surface, but divers were unable to locate the plane's wreckage, killing all 58 passengers. On October 13, 1950, Flight No. Unknown Martin 202. This flight was intended to be a training flight originating and ending at Minneapolis-St. Paul. The reversal of the right propeller during the flight caused the plane to spin out of control and crash, killing all 6 on board. On November 7, 1950, Flight 115 Martin 202 Flight 115 was flying a scheduled route of Chicago Minneapolis/St. Paul Billings Great Falls Helena Butte Seattle when it crashed 3.1 miles east of Butte while landing. The plane crashed into the eastern slope of a ridge killing all 21. The cause of the crash was improperly followed approach procedures. On January 16, 1951, Flight Martin 202 Flight 115 was on the scheduled route of Minneapolis-St. Paul Billings Kalispell Spokane Wenatchee Yakima Seattle when it crashed about 11.9 miles width of Reardon after the captain decided not to land at Wenatchee but proceed to Yakima due to weather. An emergency message from the plane was heard briefly 15 seconds after the clearance was given, killing 10. The cause of the crash is not known. On January 19, 1952, Flight 324 Douglas C-54 was flying a non-scheduled flight originating in Tokyo, ending at McChord Air Force Base with intermediate stops in Shemya and Anchorage-Elmendorf Air Force Base. While opposite Sitka, Alaska, the number 1 propeller was feathered by the captain, who requested a diversion to Sandspit. As the plane was landing, it touched down about a third of the way down the runway. At around the midpoint, power was applied and the plane took off, but it stalled due to the steep climb and plunged into the water at the end of the runway, killing 36, injured 7. The cause of the crash was the icing that prevented the pilot from retracting the nose gear. In 1954, Northwest Orient purchased Douglas DC-6BS and started flying them to Tokyo and Manila. In January 1960, Northwest was operating transcontinental Lockheed L-188 Electra turboprop service nonstop between New York City and Seattle, with these flights being part of the airline's service between New York City and Asia, with Douglas DC-7C aircraft being operated on the trans-Pacific legs from Seattle, and was also operating Electra Propjet flights between Minneapolis/St. Paul, Milwaukee and Chicago Midway Airport in the north, and several destinations in Florida in the south, including Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Tampa. For years, Northwest was the largest foreign airline serving Japan. In 1951, Northwest became involved with the founding of Japan Airlines by leasing airliners and crew members to the new airline. In 1952, United States and Japan ratified a regional bilateral aviation treaty, under which Northwest and Pan American World Airways became the two U.S. airlines in Tokyo. These carriers also received fifth freedom rights to carry passengers from and via Tokyo to other Asian destinations such as Seoul, Busan, Taipei, Kaohsiung, Manila, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, and Singapore. Northwest also flew passenger routes from Japan to Guam and Saipan, U.S. possessions in Micronesia. On April 2, 1956, Flight 2 Boeing Stratocruiser crashed after takeoff from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport on a flight to Portland, Oregon, Chicago and New York City. The pilots ditched the aircraft into Puget Sound, 5.4 miles off Seattle, killing 5, injured 2 and 31 uninjured. Northwest's meteorologists, led by Dan Sowa, pioneered the first clear air turbulence forecasting system in 1957, important since the airline flew many northern routes over turbulence-prone mountain areas. Northwest remained a leader in turbulence prediction, providing turbulence prediction and warning services to other airlines. During the regulated era, Northwest's domestic network was mainly along the northern transcontinental route through Chicago, Minneapolis, and Seattle. New York and Detroit were added in 1945. Northwest also served Hawaii from the West Coast, and, starting in 1958-59, Georgia and Florida from Chicago. On June 1, 1959, Northwest accepted its first turboprop, the L-188 Electra, from the Lockheed Corporation. On March 17, 1960, Lockheed L-188 Electra was en route to Miami from Chicago when the aircraft lost a wing at approximately 18,000 feet near Tell City, Indiana, killing all 63 passengers. On July 14, 1960, Flight 1-11 Douglas DC-7 Northwest 1-11 was flying from New York City to Manila, Philippines, with stops in Seattle, Anchorage, Tokyo, and Okinawa. The plane was on its final leg between Okinawa and Manila when the No. 2 engine experienced power loss. The propeller then separated from the plane and hit the fuselage, slashing a 15-inch hole. The pilot decided to ditch the plane in the Pacific Ocean about 77.5 miles NE of Manila. Upon impact, the rear of the plane separated as well as the engines and right wing. The majority of the survivors used the right wing, which floated for 3 hours, as a life raft until rescue came. Killing 1, injured 58. On October 28, 1960, Flight 104 Douglas C-54 Flight 104 was flying from Spokane to Missoula when it crashed about 20 miles W of Missoula in the Clark Fork Valley. The plane was seen making a steep left banking turn with nose up. The plane continued rolling and crashed inverted, killing 12. The crash was attributed to pilot error. On September 16, 1961, Flight 706 Lockheed L-188 Electra was on a routine flight from Milwaukee to Miami, with stops in Chicago, Tampa, and Fort Lauderdale. While departing from Chicago, the plane banked to the right and gradually descended until hitting the ground. The cause of the crash was mechanical failure of the ailerons, killing all 37 passengers. On October 22, 1962, a DC-7 with 7 crew and 95 passengers made a successful water landing in Sitka Sound. The military charter flight was en route to Elmendorf Air Force Base from McChord Air Force Base and, prior to the ditching at just before 1 p.m. local time, the crew had been struggling with a propeller problem for about 45 minutes. The plane stayed afloat for 24 minutes after coming to rest in the water, giving the occupants ample time to evacuate into life rafts. Only 6 minor injuries were reported. All passengers and crew were quickly rescued by U.S. Coast Guard ships. The accident report called the ditching an outstanding feat, citing several key factors in this water landing success: pilot skill, ideal conditions, time to prepare for the ditching, and the military passengers' ease with following orders. Pilots who flew over the scene also praised the Northwest crew, calling it the finest ditching they had ever seen. On February 12, 1963, Flight 705, Boeing 720 flying from Miami to Chicago crashed in the Florida Everglades approximately 37 miles SW of Miami International Airport while diverting to avoid bad weather, killing all 43 passengers. The cause of the crash was an unrecoverable loss of control due to severe turbulence. On June 3, 1963, Flight 293 Douglas DC-7 was flying a military air transport service flight from McChord Air Force Base outside Tacoma, Washington, to Elmendorf Air Force Base outside Anchorage, Alaska. While in flight, contact was lost. Floating debris from the plane was located 182.5 miles WSW of Annette Island, killing all 101 passengers. The cause of the crash was never determined. Northwest Airlines started flying the three-engine Boeing 727-100 in November 1964. Many stretched B-727-51s followed. On January 22, 1971, Northwest Airlines Flight 433 was hijacked en route from Milwaukee to Detroit, Michigan. The hijacker demanded to be taken to Algeria, but the plane landed in Cuba instead. On November 24, 1971, Northwest Airlines Flight 305, en route from Portland International Airport to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, was hijacked by D.B. Cooper. After receiving a $200,000 ransom payment and 4 parachutes in Seattle, he ordered the crew to fly to Mexico, and he jumped from the aft air stairs of the Boeing 727-051 while it was in flight over Washington. The aircraft later landed safely in Reno, Nevada, but Cooper's fate remains unknown. On December 1, 1974, Flight 6231 Boeing 727 was flying on a ferry flight from John F. Kennedy International Airport to Buffalo when it crashed in the vicinity of Stony Point. As the plane was cleared to climb, the airspeed and rate of climb increased, until the plane stalled and descended out of control into a wooded area. The cause of the crash was loss of control because the flight crew failed to realize and correct the aircraft's high angle of attack, low-speed stall and descending spiral, killing 3 passengers. On May 8, 1977, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 22, a Boeing 747 en route from Tokyo to Honolulu, was hijacked by a passenger who held a razor to a flight attendant's throat and demanded to be flown to Moscow. The flight's purser subdued the hijacker with a fire axe. The flight returned to Tokyo so the hijacker's injuries could be treated. No other injuries were reported. After airline deregulation in 1978, Northwest began nonstop flights to other Asian cities, returned to China in 1984 after a 34-year hiatus, and strengthened its presence in the southwestern United States. It also began flying to the United Kingdom, Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. On January 20, 1983, Flight 608 Boeing 727 was en route from Seattle, Washington, to Portland, Oregon, when it was hijacked. The man informed a flight attendant that he had a bomb and demanded to be taken to Afghanistan. Landing in Portland to refuel, the hijacker negotiated with airport authorities. Federal agents stormed the aircraft. The hijacker threw the box he claimed had a bomb at the agents, who shot and killed him. The box contained no explosives. On May 21, 1984, shareholders in Northwest approved the creation of NWA Incorporated, a Delaware corporation that became the holding company of Northwest. On October 1, 1986, Northwest merged with Republic Airlines, also based in Minneapolis-St. Paul. It was the largest airline merger at the time and caused operational issues which led the combined carrier to have an on-time performance of just 42% in its early days. Through the merger, NWA adopted Republic's 3-hub domestic network centered around Detroit, Memphis, and Minneapolis-St. Paul. The combined airline became particularly strong in the first 2 cities, with a market share of over 80% in each. After the merger, the airline dropped Orient from its branding. One major reason for the merger was that Northwest's unique position as a domestic and transpacific carrier had been challenged in 1985 when United Airlines acquired the Pacific division of Pan Am. On August 16, 1987, Flight 255 McDonnell Douglas MD-82 crashed on takeoff from Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport. All but one aboard the MD-82 died. The cause of the crash was attempted takeoff with the wrong configuration due to pilot mismanagement, killing 154 and 2 on the ground with 2 ground injuries. Northwest continued to use the pre-merger Northwest Orient livery minus the word Orient until a new livery and identity designed by Landauer Associates were adopted in 1989. The new livery, nicknamed the bowling shoe by employees, featured colors of red, white, gray, and very dark blue. Also in 1989, Northwest became the launch customer of the Boeing 747-400 and became one of only 2 airlines in the United States to operate it until its merger with Delta in 2009. The first aircraft it purchased was the first 747-400 to be built. It was later involved in a loss of control incident in 2002 and placed on display at the Delta Flight Museum following its retirement by Delta in 2015. Northwest was purchased in a 1989 leveraged buyout by an investment group headed by Al Checkey, Fred Malek, and Gary Wilson, with KLM and many others. To pay off the debt incurred, the new management sold many of the airline's aircraft to leasing companies and sold property around the world, including land in central Tokyo. The expense of the buyout was so great that in 1993, following several years of losses due to industry overcapacity and a traffic downturn following the Gulf War, Northwest threatened bankruptcy to force 3 years of wage cuts upon its employee groups. Northwest subsequently made its first profit since 1989 on the backs of its workers. On January 4, 1990, the right-hand engine fell off of Northwest Airlines Flight 5, Boeing 727 registration N2280, en route from Miami to Minneapolis with 145 passengers and crew. The pilots heard a loud bang, noticing that the aircraft had lost power but not realizing why. They made a safe emergency landing in Tampa, at which point they discovered that the engine was missing. It was found the next day in a field near Madison, Florida. The accident was attributed to lavatory seals in the forward fuselage that had been improperly installed by airline technicians. When the cabin was pressurized, lavatory fluid was forced through the seals and ingested by the engine, damaging the compressor blades. On March 8, 1990, a Northwest Airlines Boeing 727 carrying 91 passengers flew from Fargo, North Dakota, to Minneapolis with both pilots and the flight engineer legally drunk. All 3 men were subsequently fired and had their licenses revoked by the FAA. On December 3, 1990, Flight 1482, a DC-9-14 departing for Pittsburgh collided with Flight 299, a Boeing 727-200, departing from Memphis at Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport near the intersection of runways 0927 and 03C/21C in dense fog. The 727 had begun its takeoff roll, and the DC-9 had just taxied onto the active runway. None of the 146 passengers and 10 crew members aboard the 727 were injured, but the DC-9 sustained serious damage. In 1993, Northwest began its strategic alliance with KLM, which was the largest airline partnership at that time. This partnership eventually became the Wings Alliance, but the alliance never grew beyond the 2 airlines. Northwest gradually pulled out of its minor European destinations and focused on domestic and Asian markets. On May 1, 1996, Northwest inaugurated the first-ever non-stop service from North America to China, Detroit-Beijing. Non-stop Detroit-Shanghai service followed in April 2000. These non-stop services were suspended in 2002 due to the outbreak of SARS. Northwest then served these routes via Tokyo. The airline sought government approval to restore non-stop Detroit-Shanghai service in March 2007 but lost its bid to United's Washington-Beijing route. However, before their merger with Delta Airlines, Northwest received tentative authority to restart non-stop Detroit-Shanghai service starting March 25, 2009. January 2, 1999, due to bad weather and blizzards, passengers were stranded on aircraft at Detroit for periods up to 8.5 hours. An official inquiry found the delays were serious and indicate that this event had important implications for passenger safety. Moreover, even if the well-being of passengers had not been an issue, the review team believes that the stranding of passengers on aircraft queued on taxiways for up to 8.5 hours invites more serious problems and is simply unacceptable. None of the other airlines serving Detroit experienced ground delays approaching the magnitude of Northwest's delays. Subsequently, passengers brought various legal claims against the carrier including false imprisonment and negligence and obtained a $7.1 million settlement. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, Northwest enjoyed profits and focused on improving technology to increase convenience and reduce costs. The airline offered airport self-service check-in kiosks starting in 1997 and had more than any other airline. Northwest was the first large U.S. airline to offer internet check-in to passengers, with service from December 2000. During the early 2000s decade, Northwest acquired a reputation for refusing to adopt industry-wide fare increases that had been accepted by other airlines. This changed in March 2005, when Northwest adopted fare hikes in response to rising oil prices. On March 17, 2001, Northwest Airlines Flight 985, an Airbus A320 registered N357NW with 144 passengers and 6 crew, was taking off from runway 3C at Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport when the nose lifted off the runway prematurely without control input from the pilots. The captain applied forward control stick to push the nose back down, but it lifted off again when he released stick pressure. Fearing that the plane might be uncontrollable in flight, the captain initiated a rejected takeoff, but the plane briefly became airborne, sustained a hard landing and a tail strike, and overran the runway, coming to rest in a muddy field 400 feet past the threshold. 3 passengers reported minor injuries from the accident and ensuing emergency evacuation. The accident was attributed to pilot-induced oscillations during the takeoff and the delay in aborting the takeoff. Contributing factors were incorrect trim tab settings by the first officer, which the captain failed to notice during pre-flight checks, and a wet runway. Due to competition from low-cost carriers such as Southwest Airlines and the impact of paying living wages in a new contract with employees represented by the Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association labor union, Northwest began to make cutbacks in early 2001 to preserve profits and executive salaries. 2 small rounds of employee layoffs and other cutbacks were implemented in the months before the September 11 attacks. Following the attacks, Northwest was forced to make dramatic changes to its business structure through major employee layoffs and other cost-cutting measures. The retirement of costly and aging aircraft such as the Boeing 727 and McDonnell Douglas DC-10-40 were accelerated as new aircraft went into service. In addition, the airline pursued options to reduce costs across the board, including removing pillows, peanuts, pretzels, in-flight entertainment on domestic flights, and newspapers and magazines. Over 50 McDonnell Douglas DC-9, Boeing 757, Boeing 747, and Airbus A320 family aircraft were withdrawn from use in an attempt to lower overall capacity and save money. Some of these aircraft were returned to service. On October 9, 2002, Northwest Airlines Flight 85, a Boeing 747-400, experienced a lower rudder hard over during cruise. The crew declared an emergency and diverted the airplane to Ted Stevens International Airport in Anchorage, Alaska. On June 19, 2004, pilots mistakenly landed at Ellsworth AFB instead of the nearby Rapid City Airport. Passengers aboard were asked to close their window shades by U.S. Air Force security personnel. Following many years of a pioneering and close partnership with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, Northwest, along with partners KLM and Continental Airlines, joined SkyTeam, an alliance of 10 airlines from around the world, on September 15, 2004. This was partially a result of Air France merging with KLM, forming the Air France-KLM group. Northwest continued to hemorrhage money, however. On May 10, 2005, a Northwest Airlines DC-9 collided on the ground with a Northwest Airlines Airbus A319 that had just pushed back from the gate at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. The DC-9 suffered a malfunction in one of its hydraulic systems in flight. After landing, the captain shut down one of the plane's engines, inadvertently disabling the remaining working hydraulic system. 6 people were injured and both planes were substantially damaged. The Airbus A319 was later repaired and is currently in service with Delta Air Lines as of December 2022. The DC-9, however, was written off. On June 19, 2005, at 0435 in the morning Tehran local time, Northwest Airlines Flight 41, ship number 1243, operating from Mumbai to Amsterdam made an emergency landing at the Metropolitan International Airport in Tehran, Iran. It was the first American air carrier to land in Iran in 26 years, since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. On August 19, 2005, a Northwest Airlines 747-200, registration N627US, operating flight NW74 from Tokyo Narita Airport landed at Guam International Airport without its nose gear fully extended. The nose of aircraft made full contact with the runway. Smoke was reported on board and all passengers and crew were evacuated, with only 2 minor injuries reported. Despite far-reaching money-saving initiatives, the industry-wide history of inflated executive compensation forced Northwest to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for the first time in its 79-year history. The filing took place in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York on September 14, 2005. With Northwest's filing, 4 of the 6 largest U.S. carriers were operating under bankruptcy protection. Northwest joined Delta Airlines, which filed just minutes before, United Airlines, and U.S. Airways in bankruptcy. All 4 carriers subsequently emerged from bankruptcy protection. Northwest common stock shares dropped more than 50% for the second time in 3 days following the news, largely because the stock is generally canceled as part of the bankruptcy process. In the following weeks, Northwest airline carriers Mesaba Airlines and Pinnacle Airlines both announced that Northwest Airlines had missed payments to them for their Airlink flying. Northwest also announced plans to shrink its Airlink fleet by over 45 aircraft. Mesaba Aviation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on October 13, 2005. Northwest announced on May 18, 2007, that shares of the company would begin to trade on the NYSE under the ticker NWA. Initial trading on a when-issued basis began on May 21, 2007, and regular trading began on May 31, 2007. Also on May 18, 2007, Northwest Airlines was cleared by a federal bankruptcy judge to emerge from Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on May 31, 2007, ending Northwest's 20 months of difficulty trying to slash costs. On July 16, 2007, Northwest Airlines applied to the United States Department of Transportation for nonstop service between its World Gateway hub in Detroit to Shanghai beginning in 2007 on Boeing 747-400s and to Beijing beginning in 2010 on Boeing 787 Dreamliners. The airline faced off against Delta Airlines, which proposed Atlanta to Shanghai and Beijing, American Airlines Chicago/O'Hare Beijing, Continental Airlines Newark Shanghai, U.S. Airways Philadelphia Beijing, United Airlines Los Angeles Shanghai and San Francisco Guangzhou, and MA's Jet Seattle Shanghai in the route competition. On August 12, 2007, Northwest Airlines became a passive investor in the purchase of Midwest Airlines by TPG Capital. The airline stated that while it was an investor, it would not participate in any management or control of Midwest Airlines. However, on August 14, 2007, AirTran Airways raised their offer for Midwest to $16.25 a share, 25 cents more than the TPG offer. But soon after, on August 17, 2007, TPG Capital raised their offer to $17 a share, which sealed the deal. Northwest Airlines became a minority owner of Midwest Airlines in the fourth quarter of 2007. On September 25, 2007, Northwest Airlines received approval to begin service to Shanghai from its Detroit hub beginning March 25, 2009. American, Continental, Delta, and U.S. Airways also received new or additional China route authority to Shanghai or Beijing, and United received authority to serve Guangzhou. October 20, 2007, Northwest Airlines Flight 1432 executed an emergency landing at Hector International Airport in Fargo, North Dakota because the nose wheels had jammed in an abnormal position. There were no injuries on board. It had been reported as early as January 2008 that Delta and Northwest were in merger discussions. News reports covering the event and the official press release reported that the new airline would use the Delta name and have its headquarters in Atlanta. The proposed merger partners lost a combined $10.5 billion in first quarter 2008, an amount that exceeded their combined market capitalization. When the airlines combined, the new Delta would be based in Atlanta with a network focused on its main hubs in Atlanta, Detroit, and Minneapolis/St. Paul, along with other hubs at Cincinnati/Northern Kentucky International Airport, John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City, Salt Lake City International Airport, Los Angeles International Airport, Memphis International Airport, Narita International Airport near Tokyo, Amsterdam Airport Schiphol, and Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. Richard Anderson was CEO of Northwest Airlines until 2004, the year before Northwest Airlines declared bankruptcy. Then, in 2007, he became CEO of Delta Airlines when the merger took place. On April 14, 2008, both Delta and Northwest Airlines announced that they would merge to create the world's largest airline under the Delta name. The Atlanta-based combined airline will have $17.7 billion enterprise value. The company also stated on April 14, 2008 that it agreed with its pilot union to extend the existing collective bargaining agreement through the end of 2012. The agreement, subject to a vote by the pilots, provided Delta pilots a 3.5% equity stake in the created new airline. On September 26, 2008, it was announced that both Delta and Northwest shareholders had approved the merger. Approval by a federal antitrust review board was the last step needed to finalize the deal. The proposed merger is likely to produce substantial and credible efficiencies that will benefit U.S. consumers and is not likely to substantially lessen competition, the Justice Department said in a statement issued by its antitrust division. The deal passed through antitrust overview from the Department of Justice. As most analysts expected, the deal was not blocked, due to the minimal overlap between the two airlines' routes and very little threat to competition in the industry. The merger was also expected to be the subject of several hearings in the United States Congress. Representative Jim Oberstar of Minnesota, who also serves as chair of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, made clear his opposition to the merger, and he fought it in Washington. There was also strong support for the merger at the Capitol from legislators from Georgia, including Representative Lynn Westmoreland, Representative David Scott, and Senator Johnny Isakson. On August 7, 2008, the merger got regulatory approval from the European Union. After a 6-month investigation, government economists concluded the merger would likely drive down costs for consumers without curbing competition. On October 29, 2008, the United States Department of Justice approved Delta's plan to acquire Northwest. On February 20, 2009, Northwest Airlines Flight 2, a Boeing 747-400 flying from Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila, Philippines, to Narita International Airport near Tokyo, Japan, experienced severe turbulence when descending to Narita. The aircraft, with 408 passengers and 14 crew members aboard, landed safely. However, 50 people were injured, around 5 were hospitalized. On May 4, 2009, an Airbus A320-11, operated by Northwest Airlines as Flight NW557, experienced a tail strike resulting in substantial damage upon landing on runway 16 liters at Denver International Airport, Colorado. The flight was a regularly scheduled passenger flight which departed from Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, Minnesota at 11:39. On October 21, 2009, Northwest Airlines Flight 188, an Airbus A320, flying from San Diego International Airport to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport overflew the Minneapolis airport and continued to fly off course by 150 miles, leaving air traffic control to believe that the flight had been hijacked. The pilots originally stated that they were in an argument regarding airline policy and did not notice that they had flown off course, but later admitted to using their personal laptop computers at the time. The pilots contacted air traffic control after they realized their mistake and the flight arrived safely in Minneapolis about 1 hour late. The pilots' commercial flying licenses were subsequently revoked by the FAA. On December 25, 2009, a Nigerian al-Qaeda member tried to detonate plastic explosives on Northwest Airlines Flight 253, an Airbus A330 from Amsterdam to Detroit, as the plane was landing in Detroit. The device failed to detonate properly, and the suspect suffered third-degree burns. 2 other passengers incurred minor injuries. The White House said it considered it an attempted terrorist attack. Delta and Northwest's operating certificates were merged on December 31, 2009. From a technical standpoint, Northwest then ceased to exist as an independent carrier. Ground operations and reservation systems were combined on January 31, 2010.
A promotional fee has been paid by Northwest Airlines, finding new ways to serve you for more than 60 years.
Some people just know how to fly.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.